Bom dia, pessoal! Gostaria de cumprimentar as pessoas, o pessoal que já está por aqui, desejar um bom dia a todos, agradecer muito a presença de todos aqui e gostaria de, especialmente, dizer algumas palavras sobre esta parceria neste evento, que nos honra muitíssimo, porque é o primeiro evento que nós realizamos em parceria com a PUC Campinas, pelo menos é o primeiro evento da graduação. Não sei exatamente se lá no PPGD da FDSM já havia feito alguma coisa antes, mas a graduação, o PPGD, juntos com o PPGD da Unicamp é a primeira vez, desculpe, com o PPGD da PUC Campinas é a primeira vez, então eu gostaria muito de agradecer essa oportunidade, essa abertura que o Peter nos deu para que nós, então, realizássemos este evento em parceria. E gostaria muito de cumprimentar a Helena, mais uma vez aqui com a gente, disponibilizando o seu tempo, o seu conhecimento, enriquecendo muitíssimo aí o nosso conhecimento. Então, I would like to thank Elena again for being here, for sharing your knowledge with us. Our students, they are enjoying a lot these talks with you, these opportunities to learn from you, Elena. So thank you very much. And now, Peter, please. Peter will say some words about these events, these joint events, and about this talk. Peter, a palavra está com você.
Thank you, Elena. My sound is really not good, but let's try. So, good morning, everyone. First things first, I'd like to thank Professor Ana Carolina for making this event happen. It has been a great partnership between FDSM and PUC Campinas Law Master's degree. I also, of course, would like to thank Professor Elena Kapardis for sharing your experience about judge and decision making. And finally, I would like to thank the audience for joining us. I can see almost 50 people with us. And so let me formally introduce the lecturer of today. Professor Elena Kapardis is an advocate at Elias A. Stefanu LLC since 2014. She has a broad range of experience advising both international and Cyprus-based individuals and companies, with expertise in matters bridging the specialism of private prosecution, white-collar, and extradition. She is an experienced criminal litigator, have written articles and present lectures on issues of judicial studies, sentencing practice and resiliency. She also delivers training in developments in judicial decision-making and empowering vulnerable groups through education. So, Elena, it's a pleasure and an honor for us to have you here with us today. And now we are excited to listen to you. Thanks.
Elena, we can't hear you. Yeah, we still can't hear you. That's the second button on the left here. It may be blue.
Now it works?
Yes.
Sorry. So I was just saying that it's a huge honor and a privilege to be in your company, to share ideas, and it's always a pleasure to be in a lecture series with Anna. She has so much to talk about judges, and I can't wait to hear Peter's perspectives as well. He's so well rehearsed in issues, especially relating to Supreme Court Brazilian judges, and I'm sure we're going to have a great lecture series together. While we were discussing the topics for today's lecture with Anna, I think we wanted to keep it broad again. So that's why we kind of ended up with judges and judicial decision making. And I think there's a few things that I'd like to point out from the very beginning. There's a few myths that I'd like for us to destabilize or think about during today's lecture. And a few of them are the following. The first is the way in which we think about judges, the way in which the stereotypes that we have in our mind, the idealized versions of judges that we have either through the media, through our own literature research, through our own inherent social, cultural, socioeconomic standing. Who do we perceive to be a judge? The second thing is, what do we perceive a judge's role to be? Do we perceive a judge's role to be specifically in relation to making decisions? What kind of ideas pop to mind when we think about a judicial decision-making process? Is it an outcome? Is it a process? What goes into that process? And my favorite part of the lecture, the last part of the lecture, which will be in relation to the behavior of a judge. What do we expect a judge's behavior to look like? What happens when it doesn't mirror that? And what factors may we not be considering when we have the ideas that we have about a judicial behavior? And the behavior or the state that I would like to concentrate on during today's lecture is the subject or the literature on judicial stress. How does stress impact the judicial decision-making process? Not the decision per se or the outcome a judge may reach in their own decision, but the process itself. How does stress impact the way in which one perceives their role? How does it inhibit it? Can it be destructive? And in order to do that, there will be some key case studies, and the main one will be the research that I've linked in relation to the Australian judiciary, which has some exceptional work on stress and well-being, and most importantly, the work of Carly Shrever and her analysis of the Australian judiciary and the impact of stress on the ability of judges to live out their day-to-day experiences. So let's kind of start at the very, very, very beginning, which is, what do we perceive a judge to be? I don't know if everybody just takes a moment to think about what's the word, what's the visual, what's the picture that comes to your mind when you think about a judge? What's the word in Portuguese, guys, for a judge? Is it it's something similar, that's for sure.
I'm sorry, Elena. What was? Sorry, I will turn off my microphone and you tell again, please.
Okay. What's the Portuguese word for judge?
Juiz.
Because here in Brazil, this is something interesting. Maybe you can talk about it. The difference between judges and magistrates, because here we don't have this difference.
Okay. And just a second follow-up question. Is that word male or is it female? Juiz.
It's non-gender, not defined gender. It's for male and female.
Beautiful. So judge, very much like the word God, is, at least in English, is gender neutral, so to speak. And so during my own research, during my doctorate research, one of the first things that I used to do with the judges that I was interviewing as part of the pilot part of my study, so before I moved into their formal interviews, was I would ask them, what image comes to mind when you think of the word judge? And in most of the cases, with the exception of one, most of them drew a man in a cloak, sitting on a desk, far away from everybody else, kind of a sad face, or should I say neutral face. And they were essentially, this was the image that came to mind. And I'd love if later on anybody has a different image that came to mind as soon as they heard the word, either in English or in Portuguese, to share that with us so that we can discuss that a little bit more. But why do we start with this standing point? Because just as in a judge's way of thinking, because a judge is human, very much like our representations of him, a judge also has preconceived notions, has experience, has background, and all these things infiltrate into the way in which the decision-making process commences. So that's why it's very important to understand that when we consider a judge or the image of a judge, we also have the ideas that come with the representation of a judge. This is mirrored in so many different directions in the literature. We have Ronald Dworkin, who speaks very much about the Herculean image of a judge. We have this essentially superstar person who's able to do everything, manage everything, be extraordinary, with unlimited potential. And then we have judges' autobiographies. We have so many retired judges which speak about representation of a judge as being usually male, either as Uncle Sam, as they say in the US, even as Santa Claus, fictional creatures, all these representations which are something supernatural, something godlike, something different, not necessarily human. But then we have the works of Erica Rackley in the UK, Kate Mullison, so many extraordinary English judges like Baroness Hale, American judges such as Sonia Sotomayor, Elena Kagan, who question this stereotype of what it is to be a judge, bring in questions such as work-life balance, bring in the issue of being a judge like the Little Mermaid, who may have lost their voice in all these stereotypical situations. And these kind of images help us question who is a judge, or how do we go about the process, and what are we actually bringing in? What are our own stereotypes that we are bringing into the process that we need to be thinking about, A, if we're researching judges, B, if we're lawyers and we're presenting ourselves in front of a court, or C, even if we are ourselves judges and we need to consider our own occupation. So let's move on a little bit into the representation of the judicial decision-making process. I think both Anna and myself, especially in the conferences that we go to together, Law and Society, there's such a big emphasis on the judicial decision-making behavior. So what influences a judge in order to reach a decision? And the literature on this is immense, absolutely immense. We have extraordinary works, such as that of Baum, who's kind of brought about the diversity of judicial behavior, how many things influence, but at the same time that it is a very complex process. And it's not only based on the outcome, and so it essentially is a mystery to so many of us as to how judges reach a decision. We also have Epstein and the very diverse way in which they think about things, the importance of political criteria, race, age, so on and so forth. But for the purposes of our kind of talk today, I wanted to concentrate more on some case studies so that we can all have an understanding of what goes into the process. And one of the first works that I wanted to talk about today was the work of Danziger, an Israeli study. You might have heard about this study because it's very unique. It brought to light the influence of how a judge makes a decision is influenced by what they eat. This is how this went out into journals, and it kind of got a lot of acclaim. And when we talk about this study, it's very important to think about A, are the authors really trying to show the full length of the study, or is there something as researchers or as students that we need to think about when we're questioning the data that we're given? So the first thing that I'd like to note is the catchy title. what did these authors say? And it's a very important study because it's a groundbreaking study in many respects. There was access that wasn't possible before, and so we could never completely discount research. But it's important to be critical of it. So during this study, the authors essentially found parole officers, so parole judges rather, who are judges who are going to decide if somebody is going to leave prison earlier or the personal circumstances of a prisoner warrant that person to leave prison earlier. And they found that if the judges had eaten breakfast, had a snack, or had had lunch, it was more likely that they were going to allow the person to leave the prison service. They also found that judges in their mind had what we call a coherence bias. So they wanted to make sure that the decisions that they made sense based on the previous decisions that they made. So, for example, if somebody had gone in for stealing a piece of bread, and the second case also was for stealing a piece of bread with the same circumstances, that the same person would receive the same treatment. Of course, this makes sense on the basis of stare decisis and precedent and factual basis, but it's also important for our own research. So, firstly, the sample size, if I'm not mistaken, was of 9 parole judges, so it's a smaller sample. The second thing is, although it's very catchy to say somebody's decision is affected by what they eat, the authors weren't really considering that the people that were released were also represented. So they had an advocate next to them, they had a lawyer. So maybe we found in other studies that when you have an advocate next to you, it can also affect your decision. But this opens up the question of, don't many things affect judges when they're making a decision? And there are many similar kinds of studies which follow a similar pattern. For example, there's the case of a Louisiana's case study sample, whose names I can't remember right now, but I'm sure it'll come to me. And they found that the judges who had football affiliations in Louisiana in the US, when their team lost, I think they're the Tigers that they were called, then the judge was very annoyed with minority juveniles. So it was a juvenile court, and they would pass more incriminating status and harsher sentences when their football team lost. So again, these case studies or this research is always very interesting, but there's always a few things when you dig into the research, you find that they hadn't thought about the suspended sentences, which are also sentences from a legal perspective, but it didn't make the research as catchy. So that's a starting point of when we're thinking about the factors that we have. Let's move on now into the questions that relate to behavior. So when we think about behavior, very much like the ways that we thought about the idealized judge, we can look at judicial appointments criteria around the world. And I think the UK Appointments Commission and the criteria that they have is a pretty representative sample. So we have criteria such as being able to think critically, being able to be calm, or not responding quickly to criticism, being patient, these kind of neutral characteristics. But what happens if you're in a jurisdiction very much like Cyprus, where you have an extreme caseload, and I think that's the same in Brazil. You have an extreme caseload based on the circumstances, you're understaffed, you don't have a motivational board, you don't have leadership criteria to improve your mental health basis, for example. What happens even if you're a calm person and you are relaxed and you enjoy your job and you're motivated and you've always really wanted to be a great judge? is that we will find that some people will react to these circumstances of events differently. And some people may even become demotivated. This was the case in the Australian judiciary, and I think more especially in the judiciary of Victoria. And that's what influenced researchers such as Mack and Andlow to have their study on what is really influencing the judiciary right now. And that study found that there was a serious lack of motivation in the judiciary as a whole. This was also very similar in the UK. I think in the UK there was an interest in retirement earlier than normal, I think of 60 or 70%. It was insane. And that's what caused the Chief Justice, Michael Rosenes, the Chief Justice Michael Rosenes, to kind of look into the Australian judiciary and say, okay, what is going on here? Why is there this dissatisfaction? And it started off this program, it started off the research that Carly Shrever delved into, and she found very many different things. And you can find the main findings in the article, but just as a point of notice to anybody that may not have had time to go through it, the first one was in relation to the state of distress. And it's important to consider the relationship of stress and distress as we progress into the literature and talking about the literature. So they found that 52.9% of the judicial officers that they had interviewed, a total of 152, so a pretty big representative sample, scored moderate to very high in terms of distress. And we know from other research that lawyers and judges are more likely to show stress or distress due to the nature of their vocation. So we usually have to do with conflicts. We usually have to do with drama or extreme situations, whether those are in relation to a difficult point in someone's life, in someone's economic status, into their social status. It's a pretty hard and tense job. So we were expecting kind of a moderate level, but not a moderate to very high level. The second one is that there was a medium to high risk range of alcohol use. And this is what most media outlets kind of caught on to this research. They were kind of really grasping about the concept of alcohol and how judges were using coping mechanisms such as alcohol use, and how this was, if this was influencing judicial decision making. And we'll get to that very shortly. The third point was that judges 75.2, which is a huge percentage of the sample, had 3 burnout factors. And they mirrored the 3 burnout factors as cynicism, exhaustion, and reduced professional efficacy. And as we consider the effects of burnout, we will find that not only may they have an effect on someone's daily life, but they may also have an effect on the way in which judges are actually living out their daily lives in court. So let's kind of go and tease out these three main findings that they found. Let's move firstly into alcohol, because it's always the one that everybody gets really interested in once you hear that judges' coping mechanisms is alcohol. So it's important to consider that in many occasions, when somebody is going through stress or in a specific situation of distress, it's likely that there will be a variety of coping mechanisms. These can range from fight to flight. So you're either going to fight the system or you're going to leave the profession, which is what started the research in the first place. It may relate to detachment. So you become completely detached from what you're listening, from what you're involved in your daily life, which of course has consequences in terms of exhaustion and the efficacy of your work. Or it may relate to addictions, amongst other things. And in other research that is ongoing right now, we've also seen a strong relationship between judges and food addictions. So, and most judges have said that they've increased weight since they've joined the profession. And this is interesting in terms of the coping mechanisms judges have had to deal with. So is alcohol necessarily a problem in this case? In the research that Shriver did, she clearly pointed out that the alcohol usage was such that they definitely weren't drinking while they were on the bench. It wasn't that kind of an impact, but it was them drinking maybe twice a week, which to many of us, we might have a glass of wine more often than that. But it was also the amount of drinking. So they may be able to finish a bottle of wine in a sitting, which influenced the interpretation of the data. And this moves us essentially into the way in which we think about stress. So there's another concept that is regularly used, because when you talk about stress or mental health with judges, they don't like to use these kind of words because they're stigmatized and it makes them feel that they may be impartial. So usually when we're training a judge or when we're talking to a judge from a counseling or a training perspective, there's this research that has developed in the US which calls this symptom the disease of Robitis. So you wear a robe when you're a judge, and it's Robitis. They've added it on to make it sound a little bit more scientific, but so that we don't have to say you're going through depression or you have a post-traumatic stress disorder. And what does Robitis essentially talk about? Robitis refers to the state in which the mental health of a judge is such that it makes the functioning dysfunctional. So it makes a judge's role unable to be performed. And this can relate to different aspects of a judge's life. And this has been very beautifully brought out by Miller and Richardson, a study that they made in 2006. And they showed the many different elements that go into a judge and the way in which it influences their life. So it usually starts influencing their job satisfaction, their performance, even their attitudes towards crime, their attitudes towards who is attributed for the crime. They may start to miss work a little bit more, or they may start to have a bad relationship with their colleagues. Or even in relation to their job success. And as with many human conditions, you don't pinpoint a situation and give it a cause that happens immediately. What do I mean by this? Not everybody reacts to a situation in exactly the same way. So, for example, and I can draw on my own research to give some examples, some people may be really motivated to go to work. They're excited, they're passionate, they love what they do. But they consistently lose promotions and they don't understand why, or they don't want to understand why. And once they consistently lose promotions, they immediately become demotivated and they start seeing more negative things in their own environment. This can be a cause for stress or a cause for Robitis. And I'll give you an example of a person in my own sample. So this lady was a judge, a female judge. She was in the mid-range and she had lost a few promotions. And she said that this was because she was too old. And once we had this conversation, I asked her, what does she perceive her role to be? And she said that she believes a judge is a person who not only has to give a decision at the end of the day, but she was trying to bring together the parties. She was trying to make sure that everybody in the courtroom was happy, was having a cathartic experience, a good experience as much as possible. And this, in many occasions, made her to make less decisions, to be slower in writing decisions. So I asked her if she had received criticism for being slow. And she said she had. On many occasions, they had criticized her because and they had said that she doesn't want to work as hard. But she said her vision of justice was one that was very different from her colleagues. So what do we see with this judge? We see a few things. We see that she's not understood. We see that she's not able to express her own experience with her colleagues in a way that she feels will be understood. She doesn't feel comfortable to express it. And at the same time, she is punished for the way in which she lives her daily life. And these are characteristics which this judge later on went on to say that it caused her a lot of distress. She didn't want to go to work anymore. She didn't want to be a judge anymore. And she said that she wasn't willing to stay in the profession, and she was actually starting to think about leaving. And when I asked her, okay, why haven't you left? She said, because I love this job very much, and I'm hoping that I can be able to change it. And this is the stepping stone. It's a very important stepping stone, which Angela Duckworth calls the difference in mindset. So in the research of grit or any resilience study that we find, we see that mindset is a very important point, and it's a very important point in our studies of judicial behavior as well. Once we realize that the judge is not perfect, an ideal, a Herculean figure, and that the judge is human, then we are able to move away from a fixed mindset. We are able to move into a growth mindset and say, okay, a judge is human, and there are many different characteristics which they develop. We have Maroney's research, which talks about anger in the courtroom, all these kind of extreme emotions that we don't expect a judge to have. There are so many videos of judges crying, of judges reacting, of throwing things. And they're in many occasions stigmatized from the media, from the people in the courtroom, because they are not behaving in a particular way. If you expect, of course, you expect the judge to have certain characteristics. But if they deviate a little bit from these characteristics, we shouldn't consider that this is a problem. We should try to understand why there is an expression of emotion, what it says about the system, and how we can move on from there. So let's go back to our judge with her own vision. Once our judge realized that she was human and that some people wouldn't like her, she was then able to reconsider and to say, okay, how am I going to change? Does it matter if I don't get a promotion? Is it more important to me that I have the well-being of the court? And that's when I had a very important link in the relationship between a judge and their well-being. In most studies that we found, that we kind of can look into, we see that there's not really a big difference between male and female judges on the court and well-being, except in relation to their work-life balance. That seems to be pretty much against females. Female judges seem to be finding it more difficult to achieve a work-life balance. And the reasons for this kind of depend stereotypically or culturally, but usually it's for women which are taking on caregiving roles, and that's why they're finding it more difficult. But at the same time, in my own research, I found that men are sometimes more able to compartmentalize. So they're more able to state that these are the circumstances and this is what I have to deal with right now. And that is why it's easier for me to continue being a judge, even though my child may be sick and he's at school and there's nobody to pick him up. So when we talk about judicial well-being, it's important to understand that some coping functions, such as compartmentalization, are important in the way that a judge can live their daily life. So what can we learn from all these different studies of judicial behavior or emotionality and judging, or even stress and judging? Because there's so much research out there, and there's so many amazing studies that are happening right now in this issue. I think the most important thing is that we feel comfortable to talk about these topics with our judges. that we feel comfortable to bring all these issues in our own research. And if we're students, that we feel comfortable to delve into them, to bring in multidisciplinary work together, whether it's psychological, neuroscience, and constitutional at the same time. If we bring them together, it will really help our systems come together and improve. The second thing is to be proactive in terms of the way in which we help judges. So if one looks at Canadian training guides or Australian training guides for judges, we will find that they suggest meditation, for example, to judges. Or they have special groups which are Alcoholic Anonymous just for judges. Or they encourage hiking trips for judges. So it's very important that we start thinking about the judicial decision-making process. And I say as students, as a group of students, because the literature has been decades and decades before us, in relation to the way in which we think about the judicial decision-making process. The process of a judge is not simply to sit on a high desk, detached from everybody else, and give a decision of guilty or non-guilty, or to pass a sentence. The judicial decision-making is a process. It starts the moment everybody comes together in court. It does not only relate to a judge. Leibniz talks about the courtroom actors. It's not just the judge himself or herself. It's also the clerk, the cleaner, the secretaries, the staff, the lawyers, everybody that's in a courtroom. Even IT now with COVID, and we've seen so many judging happening online. We have IT specialists zooming in into COVID courtrooms, and we have to consider that all these actors have a very important role to play. And I think I'd like to kind of sum up by talking a little bit about Elena Kagan, the Supreme Court Justice, and what she had to say about judges. So I remember during her confirmation hearing, which I think I saw on YouTube, it talks about the process of becoming a judge, and she questioned the fact that being a good judge is about knowing about the law. But in many respects, it's also about understanding emotions. It's also about understanding the way in which you are as a human being, the things that influence you, and to be respectful not only to yourself, but also to the community that you represent. This may be a racial identity, a cultural identity, and to feel comfortable to bring this into your decision-making. As we see with the Feminist Judges projects, it may be that a male and a female of the same background, the same education, reach exactly the same decision. But it's also very important to think about that decisions are also affected in the way that we write them. So me and Anna may choose the same outcome, but the way in which we talk, that we express ourselves, the things that we read, always will influence the way in which we write, the way in which we reach the outcome. And that's why so many of us law geeks have our favorite judges and our favorite decisions, because we find so many nice ways in which we identify with the judgment. So if we encourage in our research the importance of diversity, the importance that every single judge should feel comfortable to talk about their own individual characteristics, to not be a godlike figure the way Dworkin thinks about judges, but to understand that each person has characteristics that will have an influence one way or another, then not only might we be in a situation to help our own judges not have an instance of Robitis, but we will also be able to become better researchers, better lawyers, and even better students. And on that kind of point, I would really love to hear any questions that you may have and learn from you as well.
Elena, thank you very much for this so interesting talk. And for me, It's so, it was so good to hear you personally. It was so good to hear you because I am, this is my word. I am completely dive into this word. So this is so good to me to hear you and to understand better many points that you connected here today. For example, for me, it's really interesting, and I don't know if you read something about Maroney is researching now judicial temperament, and she gave many lectures at Berkeley Century of Technology. I can't remember the title, but she gave, I guess, 3 lectures on many different subjects, and one of them, it was about judicial temperament, and I guess it's really connected with what you said today, this mindset, growth mindset or a fixed mindset. So this is really interesting because for sure, when we talk about judges, and here in Brazil, as I said, it's a neutral subject, a neutral word too, no gender word. But when we talk about judges, we think this stereotype, this stone face, this person in a bench, dark clothes, and someone who is expected from this person to be impartial and objective, like the God's eye, objective according to this perspective, the God's eye. So this is really interesting to hear you, and it makes sense to think about the real judge, because the real judge has a yeah, it's a person as we are. So we have our memory, our history, our background, political background. So and it's impossible to put this aside and to judge like a judge. But this is emotional work, because there are much emotional work here involved, because this person who plays this role will try to act this way, to be this person. So this is really interesting. And I have a question for you. I will say in Portuguese to my students here. Pessoal, se vocês tiverem alguma questão, vocês podem colocar aqui a questão em português, eu traduzo, ou, como eu sei que tem muitos alunos aqui que são feras em inglês, vocês podem também colocar a questão em inglês e eu leio para Helena, tá? Então, participem sim, porque esse assunto é muito legal. E é um assunto super... para a gente que estuda essa área de direito e emoção, é o que tem de mais novo, mais top sobre esse assunto. So, Helena, I have a question for you. Professor Peter, I will, after me, yeah, it's your time to make your questions, to say something, comments and questions, and but I'm sorry because I am anxious about it. So I gave to me the word, but I gave I was this person anxious for.
No problem. That's okay.
I'm sorry. After while I was saying, I thought, oh my God, I didn't give the chance to Peter to ask. I did it. But my question for you, Elena, from everything you brought to us today, it's how do you think, because as person, we as judges, we as person and as judges, legal professionals, how it's impossible to separate these things. So a judge is a human being, so a judge has moral emotions. How do you think moral emotions can participate or can take part in decision making? How do you think this is possible? A good way to cope, to brought to this decision making process, moral emotions. Thank you.
I think if we knew that question, Anna, we would become the godlike figure of judges, and we would all be out of a job. Because I think that is such a great question and such a complex question. In my research and even in my personal life, now that the more I research the mental health of judges, I realize also many things about our mental health generally. And there's so much focus on being able to separate a thought, a behavior, and an action into a functional behavior and a dysfunctional behavior. And I like stress as a state because it has a functional role and also a dysfunctional role. So let's take the example of stress in decision making. Sometimes if you're at the beginning of your career as a judge, research has found that stress can have the ability to help you work a little bit more, study a little bit more, balance your life a little bit more, because you're really trying to bring in the adrenaline of this new position that you may have. But at the point where it becomes dysfunctional, and there's many checkpoints that you can think about as a person. Are you able to sleep correctly? Are you able to fit in other things like exercise or self-care? Are you able to have time for other people? Are your relationships with other people flourishing? Do you have positive thoughts? So if you're able to live a life and have positive emotions or positive states or constructive states at the same time, then it's more likely that you're having a functional relationship. And research shows that that very much applies to judges as well. So you may have a bad day, you may have a bad week at work as a judge, and that's normal. It's the moment that it becomes dysfunctional that help must become a priority. And I think that could be a way of considering emotions as a way in decision making by kind of categorizing them into these two states.
Perfect, Elena. I agree with you. We don't have a question at chat, but we have a comment. Flavio said, outstanding. As usual, it's pretty good once more, the opportunity to learn a bit more about the judges and decision making, as well announced as a theme for this lecture today. Thanks a bunch for sharing with us all the knowledge concerning your surveys on this subject. Flavio, your English is outstanding too. Thanks for your comment. Elena, I agree 100%. It's always a pleasure to hear you. This is, as we said in our first meeting, that's the bright side of this pandemic. And I'm sure, because we always learn from our experiences. And this is one of the good things that I'm sure we will keep for our lives and academic experience. This is the kind of academic experience we need to keep doing, keep learning this way. We have another, this is a private, okay, I have a question here, private question. I will not say the name of the person, but the question. Elena, in your opinion, are there judges like Daniel Paul Chipre nowadays?
I think it depends on if the person essentially believes that Judge Chipre was a great judge, or if they were influenced, because what I remember from Justice Chipre, he was a German judge which had issues of mental illness. So if the question is, are there judges who have issues of mental illness right now? We have many. We have, of course, it's a way of life. We have judges that relate to committed suicide in America for diverse reasons. But also, I remember that Chipre was very deeply entwined with psychology. So, as a matter of fact, my personal hero, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, is very open to having discussions about the way her own background with her parents' issues with alcoholism, her own history with diabetes, her own divorce influenced both her mental state and the way in which she judges as a judge on the Supreme Court. Of course, the very, very famous Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who died, unfortunately, very recently, she talks about the way in which she grew up, the way in which she was a mother as support to her husband, and later on the roles reversed, how that influenced both her mental state, how that made her the judge she is today, but also perhaps more importantly, especially for our students, these judges didn't really start their working life or even their studying life saying, I'm going to be a hero, or I'm going to be the best judge there is, or I'm going to go to the Supreme Court. For example, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, she wasn't interested in feminist jurisprudence. She wanted to become a lawyer so she could help her husband, a great scholar himself, a tax lawyer. And then slowly, as she got into the legal profession, slowly she empowered herself. She was surrounded by great leaders, and very much like Justice Schreber, she was able to reach her own peak the way that she designed it. So many times we have heroes, and those heroes are great because they create a goal for us. But at the same time, we shouldn't allow our heroes, we shouldn't allow our fascination or our idea of our hero to say that we won't be able to reach something like that, because every single one of us is able to reach our potential in the ways that we, if and when we want to.
Yeah, Elena, I have here another comment from Leticia Martins, and maybe you would like to say something about it. Leticia said, I actually don't have a question, but I'd like to mention how frustrated I got when you said the decisions are totally I don't think they are totally biased, but by personal things, such as football scores. I know we are humans, but this makes me kind of sad. Yeah, not totally, but partially, and this is something that deserves probably deserves a comment from you.
Mm-hmm. Leticia, I think this is very much a similar answer to what we had in our previous lecture with judges and computer judges and IT judges. And it's very much the fact that, unfortunately, the things that we need to look into, the things that we need to improve, are the things that are making us sad, annoyed, angry, frustrated, you name it. Because if something is making us frustrated, very much like the judges that we were talking about before, we can say, I don't want to hear about this research. Judges are amazing. They're impartial. They have this internal robotic system, and they can bring out the algorithm for the decision, and they're superb. And so I am ignoring your data on football matches and breakfast and eggs on toast. Or we can say, you know what, this is pretty interesting. And I understand that judges are humans, and very much like us, they may have bad days or bad weeks or bad years, and they may be partial, or they may have stereotypical answers. But unless we are in a position to have good data sets as researchers, or we are willing to ask them these questions and get better answers, then of course it will make us sad and annoyed, but then we will be improving the system rather than just having an ideal version of what a judge is. And Leticia, I think that's so much more important than simply attaching ourselves to an ideal version of what we have of what judges should be.
Yeah, sure. In our first meeting too about artificial intelligence, I said, "Oh, I don't like it," and you replied to me the best reply ever. Yeah, if you don't like it, you should research about it, because this is reality. So that's the way to deal with. I guess that was important for me, Leticia, because I completely agree. If for example, oh, I'm frustrated because I research judges and judging, and for me it's so important, this face-to-face, this contact, the interaction, the court as an interaction environment. So you were talking about intelligence or artificial intelligence. I don't like it. I really don't like it. But as I work with this subject, it's better learning a little bit more about it. So for you and for me, and I personally, I agree with you. I personally don't like it too. But as Elena said, it's an important advice for us, for you, for me, for us as researchers, because it happens. So it's better understanding why, how to deal with it, because there are real things to deal with that need to be dealt with. So, Peter, your time.
Thank you. No, I just remember a law firm colleague of mine, and he supported a local soccer team here in my home city. And when the soccer team lose some games, he went to this law firm very, very frustrated. I'm just thinking about judges, I guess the same. So thank you. I think your lecture is very, very interesting for everyone. For me, my research is more about political influence in judging, especially in, as I said, Brazilian Supreme Court, the Brazilian Supreme Court, and the U.S. Supreme Court. But I know it's very, very important for us thinking about judges as human beings. And during your talking, I started to think, here in Brazil, I don't know if you know, but here in Brazil, the judiciary branch is a very, very powerful branch. And of course, judges are powerful authorities. So they are perfect, okay? Inverted quote. But I'd like to ask you, just for my research curiosity, about political influence or political bias in Greece judiciary, especially in your, I don't know, sorry, my mistake, but my fault, but I don't know if you have a high Supreme Court, but especially in Greece, Supreme Court. And sorry for my technical problems at the beginning. Now it's okay.
Not a problem. So unlike Brazil and unlike especially the US, where there's so much data and so much interesting kind of data sets, especially on political influences and judging, because of the appointment process that we have in Cyprus, we don't have a link to the political background of a judge and their appointment process. So we don't have these huge public viewings, we don't have these public appointment processes, and we don't have disclosure of what a judge believes in. So like very recently in the US, the latest US appointments, the influence of the justice's Catholic past, her affiliation to her university, even that she goes to the gym between 4 and 5 a.m. and then she goes and she teaches at the university, and her relationship to her students. We don't have that kind of scrutiny. And as judge geeks, we love to learn all about this stuff. But as kind of researchers, in Cyprus at least, because we don't have this data set, we're not able to kind of comment on political affiliations. What we can comment on, though, is this image that you portrayed really beautifully, Peter, which is the judge as the perfect judge. And I remember reading in a newspaper that you have judge masks even for Carnival. That is like this huge mega deal that Brazilian judges are like these comic figures in carnivals, and they're super cool and super supreme, pun intended. And unfortunately in Cyprus, that image is really deteriorating due to media scrutiny. So we don't have this vision of a judge as being somebody who is essentially worshipped. But at the same time, because we don't have that worshipping element that we have, like maybe you have or the US has, we're able to be a bit more critical of our judges and treat them as equals, but at the same time be more able to get really interesting personal life data sets. But of course, I would be really interested to find out myself about Cypriot judges and their politics. Maybe it's time for some communal research between Brazil and Cyprus on the issue.
Good. We could make a comparison. That would be good.
Yeah, we have here material for a previous research. For future research, actually.
Yes.
Yes, if we don't have any more comment or question here, so I would like to thank you, Elena, again for all this knowledge shared with us, for your time, for your commitment with our universities and our students. It was a huge pleasure to hear you, to have you here. Janaína said something here. It's a pleasure to hear you for the 30th time this year. Thank you so much for all the knowledge you've shared with us during this event. Janaína, perfect comment. That's what I really would like to say to you, Elena. Thank you again, Peter, for have trusted in this work, for trust in this, yes, it's, I guess, trust in this, in a future like this, where we have this kind of meetings, where we share our knowledge, where we learn from each other. So thank you very much for trust in this project. And I hope to be with you in many other events so interesting like this one. So that's my final words. Peter, you would like to say something?
No, it's my pleasure. I guess it's the first of a lot of events. And Elena, thank you again. So I'd like to ask for your, especially the audience, to follow the constitutional issues on Instagram and Facebook, and we have this page to share some knowledge about constitutional issues, and this is just an inviting. I hope your students could follow us. Thank you.
Thank you both very much, guys. And I've learned so much from the Brazilian team and the Brazilian lecture series, and it's been an absolutely beautiful experience. I'm glad your two universities have come together, and I really look forward to learning even more from you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Pessoal, ótima sexta para todo mundo. Have a great day, everybody here. And thank you very much. That's our, yes, actually, we have the last event. It will be on next Monday, but my last event this year as sharing an event this year. So I would like to say that it was a really challenging year, but from the other side, it was a great year. I learned so much from you, Elena, from Peter. It was, yeah, an interesting year at the end. So thank you very much for shared, buddy. Elena, thank you again, Peter. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Elena. Nice to meet you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.